Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. It is April 2016, and I'm speaking to you from the northwest suburbs of Chicago, expecting there to be some great weather, and we are getting hit with snow today. I can't believe this. We just had last week, the day was 65, beautiful out, and then it's snowstorm we had the next day. Then it melted, back to some warm weather, and we're getting snow again today. Looks like Mother Nature has a mind of her own, or it could be something else. Could be HAARP, could be the government. Who knows? But that brings me to my next guest. Our guest this month is an Indiana native, an Emmy-Award-winning television producer and videographer. Now, he's also the author of numerous popular books, including The Lost Journals of Nikola Tesla. As a photojournalist, he has traveled extensively, investigated paranormal phenomena and other unusual mysteries from the Great Pyramids of Egypt to the Great Wall of China. He has worked on multiple television networks and has also appeared on History Channel's program Ancient Aliens. I'm sure everybody out there knows that program. His articles have been published in many magazines, including Mysteries, Fate, Strange Magazine, Atlanta Rising, UFO Universe, and the Flying Saucer Review, just to name a few. Now, he's a writer and editor on the online newsletter called Conspiracy Journal. You can check that out at conspiracyjournal.com. Now, this is a free weekly email newsletter considered essential reading by paranormal researchers worldwide. In addition, my guest hosts 2 webcast programs, The Outer Edge and Exploring the Bizarre. Please welcome to the show none other than Timothy Swartz. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I'm really happy to be with you today.
Well, I'm happy for you to be with me, too, because we met a while ago. Now, we never met really in person, but I had the pleasure and the honor of designing a cover for you. Isn't that right?
That's right. Boy, I'll tell you, that was one of my earlier books, a book called Teleportation. And that, of course, was published by Tim Beckley's Global Communications.
Yeah, some fantastic books came out of there. I remember reading a lot of those. And I was always intrigued and like, how did you get into some of these subject matters? How did you gain access to some of this stuff? I mean, were you ever scared at some of the things you wrote about?
Oh, no, not really. I've always, well, okay, let me say that. I haven't always been fascinated by stuff like this. I developed an interest fairly early on. I was about in 3rd grade when I was forced to do an oral report in front of my classroom about UFOs. And at that time, there had been a UFO flap going on in the United States, and everybody was given, like various news items to do a report on and then present it in front of the class. And I got UFOs. It was just synchronicity, coincidence, what have you. And from that time on, I was pegged by my classmates as being the flying saucer guy. I was the guy that, look at him, he believes in Martians and little green men and stuff like that. And, that early on, I mean, I had no interest in stuff like that. But what got me really going into it was that, people would make fun of you, like when other people were around, but then later when it was, you were just like by yourself, they would come up to me and they'd say, I don't believe in that stuff, but, and then they would tell me a story about how their family saw a flying saucer, or that their house was haunted, or, insert weird subject here. And that's what really got me interested, is the fact that it seems like everybody has had some kind of paranormal or weird experience in their life that they most people are really loath to talk about. Naturally they're afraid that they're going to be made fun of. They don't know how to pigeonhole that experience, in their brain. With the exception of like people like us or our listeners. A lot of people have no real knowledge about this kind of stuff. So when they have a weird experience, it's just like, what do I do now?
Right.
Where do I put this? And that's what really got me interested.
Well, the thing is, we were never taught any of this in school. Sure, we might talk about it here and there, but there's no professor in front of us explaining everything to us that's, just common day information. it's up
Exactly.
to, it's up to a lot of us that research it, that investigate it, have our own experiences to kind of put it out there and say, hey, what can we learn from this? Where are we headed? And that's what kind of led me to you. Is about a week ago, I was watching Tesla, Master of Lightning, that's on Netflix. And I was intrigued with some of the things that was said in the documentary, talking about a little of the esoteric practices that Tesla was getting involved with. And of course, with his research and expansion of his consciousness, he was a very intelligent man, but some of his inventions were gaining him access to things that, man had not had privy to previously. And it got me thinking, of course, of ITC, communicating with, he said he was communicating with aliens, and as well as Edison, or going into possibly communicating with the afterlife and communicating with the dead. So it got me thinking, said, you know what, I want to learn more about Tesla. What can I learn? And, I was talking to my assistant, Heather, and I said, hey, who's good out there that knows a lot about Tesla? And your name was one of the first people that came up and said, get him. Absolutely, because I remember Timothy Swartz. Get him. And here you are. So thank you so much for coming on this program, because this month's episode, I thought it'd be interesting to discuss one of the world's greatest yet esoteric engineers and inventors of all time, Nikola Tesla.
The documentary that you referred to, Tesla, Man of Lightning, that originally was a series on PBS, and they did an excellent job. Their researchers and their writers, they really uncovered a lot of great stuff. And there, even now, there are still so many detractors from Tesla, who say, that, oh yeah, he may have, invented the AC motor and, and radio and robotics and our entire, 20th, 21st century technology. But really, he was just, he was nuts. And he had no real contributions. And it just amazes me when there are still people who say and believe that kind of stuff, when actually Tesla, I think, was probably the greatest mind in the last, 200 years, maybe more than that. Yeah. The guy was just, like Wile E. Coyote would say, he was a super genius,
Yeah. When the fact that he lit up Chicago with the light bulbs and everything, I was just like blown away by that.
Mm-hmm.
He did one of the, what is that called every year? I completely forgot. It's like the festival they have once a year, the worldwide something. I can't remember, but it was in the early 1900s. And, my listeners are probably going, I know what it is. I know what it is.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I can't think of it either. Well, though, that Tesla actually had to invent his own light bulbs.
Yeah.
In order to do that, because Edison would not allow Tesla to use his patented bulbs.
That's right. And I think they got a court order. A judge had stated something, so they quickly created their own light bulb. That's how inventive he is. Well, fine. Yeah. Let's use yours. We'll create our own.
Yeah, exactly. And Tesla was like, okay, well, screw you. I'll just make my own. And so he came up with a better, more efficient version.
Yeah. And how did you? Because we're going to talk about the next 45 minutes here. We're going to talk about Nikola Tesla. How did you first learn about him or get interested in him?
Mm-hmm. I used to work for a television station in Dayton, Ohio, back in the 1980s, and one of our like monthly jobs, or like every couple of weeks, is that we would go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and talk with the press liaison to see if there's any interesting stories going on at the base that we could do. Those stories actually were really popular. They often got put on to the CBS news feed, which was like a closed circuit video feed that other CBS stations around the country could pick up. And as we were sitting there, and this guy was like going through his file, seeing like maybe something that we could do a story on, and he made this kind of off the cuff remark And he said, "Well, we're working on some stuff from that mad scientist Tesla, but I can't really talk about it now." And then he dropped it and then went on to something else. And that stuck with me because, well, first of all, mad scientist Tesla. I'd never heard of Tesla before. When I was going to school, high school, college, nobody talked about Tesla. I suppose if I had been taking, say, like, engineering or something along those lines, maybe there might have been a brief mention of Tesla. But when I was growing up, Edison was the guy. And in fact, I distinctly remember being taught that, our whole electrical system, Edison invented electricity, basically. There was no mention of Tesla at all. So that's really what got me started. And, and there was kind of, various, like synchronicities that happened after that. Maybe I was just, now aware of the name Tesla because, like about a year later, I was interviewing J. Allen Hynek, who was at Wright-Patterson. He was given a speech. It was like the 50th anniversary, I think, of the release of the Project Blue Book book. And so when I was interviewing him, afterwards, we were talking about, like alternative explanations for the UFO mystery. And he mentioned Nikola Tesla. That that there were some people who thought that some of Tesla's research into field propulsion might have led to like secret developments of man-made UFOs, and I was just like, wow, there's that name again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where it started. I started then discovering books, Margaret Cheney's books about Tesla, and it just went from there.
For those people that don't know much about Tesla, I mean, we've all heard the name, but some people don't know where he originated from, when he came to America, what was his family and upbringing like. Can you share some of that?
Well, yeah, Tesla was born in 1856 in what would now be Croatia. It was at that time it was part of the the Austrian-Hungary Empire, and his father was a Serbian Orthodox priest. And his mother, actually, her father was also an Orthodox priest. And Tesla often cites his mother as being is where he inherited his brain, so to speak. Because she apparently had a talent for inventing things herself. She would put together mechanical appliances to help herself around the household and things like that. And Tesla often said that, he thinks that he got his eidetic memory, from his mother's side of the family. And but I mean, when he was younger, I mean, he had a penchant for like making little inventions and things like that. But it wasn't until he went off to school that his teachers noticed that this was a person to be reckoned with. He was going to school in Germany, and he had the ability, well, I take that back, Germany didn't exist as a country, so to speak. So, I mean, before anybody, emails me and says, oh, there wasn't Germany then. Yeah. I mean, it was still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But his teachers noticed that he was able to perform calculus in his head, which some of them thought that he was cheating. But he wasn't, and he actually was able to finish a 4-year term in 3 years, and graduated in 1873. Not too long after he came back home, he contracted cholera and almost died a number of times. He was bedridden for, I think it's like 9-10 months, and his dad hoped that Tesla would join the priesthood, the Orthodox Serbian Orthodox priesthood, like he was. But Tesla wanted to do other things. And his father promised him that if if Tesla lived, that he would send him to the best engineering school in Europe. And that's exactly what happened. Tesla managed to pull through, and he ended up going to the Austrian Polytechnic University in Austria. Mm-hmm. And while he was there, he constantly confounded his professors because he would ask questions, which there are a lot of teachers who they don't want you to ask questions. They want you to just absorb what they are telling you. And one of the things that Tesla constantly was asking about was AC current. Was there, because at that point, everyone knew about DC current, right, and and there were little devices that that create it, and his professors always told Tesla that AC current was basically like a perpetual motion device, and that it was impossible. And years later, Tesla proved them wrong,
right?
One of the things that always stands out about Tesla that people write about was his ability to have visions. That's really, that's really the best way to describe them. He would have visions that he could use then to assist him with his research and inventions. His whole the AC motor came about. He was walking with a friend in a park, and it was the sun was going down. It was kind of like that magic hour. It was just really a beautiful early evening. And he said that just all of a sudden, this vision appeared in front of his eyes of an AC motor. And he said that, the way he describes it sounds almost like what we would call a hologram.
Right.
Nowadays, because he could move it around in any direction on any axis. He could take it apart and put it back together again. And in fact, he was so struck by this that he actually stopped and drew it in the dirt with a stick to help him try to remember, what he had seen. And, I've often wondered if he always had that ability, or if this didn't show up after he developed cholera and was sick and near death a number of times. Because, we've heard stories about people who have had life-threatening experiences, or have been hit in the head, struck by lightning, or something like that then come out of it and they are completely changed. They developed outstanding artistic or musical abilities. Some people have developed an interest in high-level mathematics or physics. And I've often wondered, Tesla was already a smart guy to begin with, but if his ability to have these visions didn't come about from some kind of, and I'll just put it bluntly, like a brain damaging event,
right?
From his cholera.
Something knocked some sense into him. The sixth sense.
It could very well be, because we've seen a number of similar cases where there is like some kind of damage to the brain at certain locations that just kind of frees up something that we all have within us. Mm-hmm. But is suppressed, by that logical side. I can't remember now, it's right brain, left brain, like one side is the analytical, and the other is the artistic, born to be wild side. And, I think that there are times when, a knock of the head or some kind of profound experience, frees up that ability in us.
Right. It's interesting when you talk about the AC and DC, and we're not talking about the rock band. We're talking about, electrical current, which is symbolic of the rock band with the lightning bolt. Is Tesla was focusing on AC and Edison was focusing on DC, correct?
Right. That's correct.
And going back to what we were talking about briefly in the beginning, it was the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And Edison and the company he was working with had the contract, or were bidding on the contract, to light up the World's Fair in Chicago. And Tesla came in with somebody else, and they basically won the bid. But Edison and the company he was with were upset about that, so they, like you said, got the thing where they could not use the light bulb. So Tesla created the light bulbs. Now, I was blown away being from Chicago, and yet I never knew that, or I never remembered that in 1893, the entire World Fair in Chicago was lit up for the first time by Tesla. Electrical current was flowing through the entire place and all the light bulbs, and it was just a wondrous sight, incredible sight. And from that, he started getting all these other contracts. They started doing more work. So you had the AC and the DC. And then what is it that the AC ended up taking over?
Oh, yes, definitely. Well, Edison had developed a DC transmission system in New York that lit a number of the boroughs. But unfortunately, DC doesn't travel very far, and periodically you have to have a station that then ramps the power back up. And I'm not a scientist here, Chris, or
Sure.
or an electrician. So I'm just kind of giving it, just the way that I understand it. So like every couple of blocks, you would have to have this retransmission station that would continue the DC current on down the lines. Very inefficient system. Well, Tesla then, here's this young upstart coming in from Europe with this AC motor that can deliver high frequency alternating currents, high voltage electricity that was safer and less expensive to operate than anything that Edison had, and would go a lot further. I mean, you could have a powerhouse at Niagara Falls, which is exactly what Tesla did.
Right.
And it was those generators then that could generate the power to light up New York, and you didn't have to have every couple of blocks another system then that would ramp the power back up again. And so naturally, Edison was making money off of his system, and here this guy came in and blew his moneymaker out of the water. Right. So naturally, Edison is going to be honked off about that, and that was a rivalry that the two had for the rest of their lives. Both of them had rather eccentric personalities. Edison, Tesla was really the more of the creative type, while Edison was the businessman. Edison had a warehouse full of engineers that would work on these ideas that Edison had till they finally came up with something, and then Edison took credit for it. Tesla, on the other hand, he maybe had like a handful of assistants, but most of the work was and thought processes came from Tesla himself.
And it's just extraordinary because we forget throughout history how important some of these individuals are to what we take for granted today. I mean, you look at Tesla creating these generators, even, Edison starting the electricity, and Tesla taking it even further to get it into our homes, to get it, to places great long distances. But he didn't stop there. He started working into radio signals. He started looking into Wi-Fi, from what we have today is known as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and those types of things. He was creating components and inventions that were tapping into that, and he was pursuing. And what's extraordinary is because that was so new. I mean, here we have this guy Marconi. Tesla creates all these patents, and Marconi gets, basically he's the one that invented the radio. But Tesla's like, well, I invented it first, and we all know how that went. But Tesla had so much to do with that. When you look at radio, you look at Wi-Fi, you look at Bluetooth, you look at electricity, harnessing all that power, not only on our planet, but even sending that out into certain parts of space. That is extraordinary that one man accomplished that.
Well, and you're talking about also a lot of these ideas that you just mentioned. He was thinking about and working on at the end of the 19th century.
Hmm?
And that's unfortunately a lot of these ideas that Tesla had never made it really past the blueprint stage or just rudimentary construction because the technology just was not advanced enough at the time to support his ideas.
Right.
He could he could envision and actually build some just very rudimentary models of some of these ideas, but it wasn't until years later when technology actually started catching up that people started to realize just exactly what he was onto, and now they've taken a lot of this stuff that Tesla conceived and have run with it. There are still things today that like inventors are applying patents for, and even though Tesla's patents have long since expired, they'll find out that Tesla had already put a patent out on this very same idea years and years ago.
That's incredible. And you look at, after creating some of these things, he started moving into more extraordinary things. We use the term esoteric. There's articles that were published, statements made by him, that he claimed to have received radio signals that were not of this earth. Now, he believed it was aliens, people from Mars or from space. Were these signals from space, or are they similar to what is known as EVPs, such as ghosts or spirits? What are the theories out there on this? Do you know?
Yeah, well, it's very controversial because this was something that again that Tesla was working on at the end of the 19th century in his laboratory in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He was out there trying to see if there was a way that he could harness the power of thunderstorms and the natural electrical producing components of the atmosphere and the Earth itself. If that could be harnessed and possibly used, to benefit mankind. And, you have to realize that at that point, Tesla was more than likely the only person on the planet who had a radio transmitter and receiver. And he was using these in order to determine where, say, like a thunderstorm was and where the lightning was. If you've ever listened to an AM station during a thunderstorm, it's very staticky. Every time there's a bolt of lightning, you can hear that across the AM band. That's basically what Tesla was doing, except that he was using just all kinds of different frequencies. And at one point, he started to receive what he termed intelligent radio signals. That kind of like along the lines of like dots and dashes and things like that were coming at irregular intervals. Now, some of his critics point out that more than likely that he was picking up, it's like natural radio signals that say like Jupiter, Saturn, or the sun or other celestial bodies produce. However, Tesla actually pointed out in one of his articles that at that point he was already well familiar with the sounds and the radio signals that that these heavenly bodies were producing, and what he was picking up was something completely different. And he speculated at the time that possibly he was like the first human to hear one planet greeting another. And this became actually something that he worked on periodically the rest of his life, trying to fine tune it. And he would build devices that would listen all across the different spectrums. And he actually got to the point where he said that he was receiving voices coming over these radio receivers, that voices that shouldn't be that shouldn't be on these bands. I mean, there's a very wide spectrum of radio frequencies, and there's just, like a very few that are actually have the ability to carry, like voice transmissions and things like that. Yet he was hearing intelligent voices on, like ultra low frequency bands, ultra high frequency bands. And he was just, he never really could figure it out. He didn't write too much about it. That's the unfortunate thing. Tesla was not much of a writer. He would write articles for magazines and things like that. But from his own experiments, we really don't have a lot of stuff that has come down to us that was actually written in Tesla's hand. Most of the stuff that we have was written down by his assistants, and some of the other stuff just ended up disappearing, for various reasons. So, I mean, we're not quite sure just exactly what Tesla was making, of these voice transmissions that he was receiving. But to me, they sound awfully familiar to what we would now call, like EVP, but rather than picking them up through, recorders, he was picking them up over, radio frequencies, which, I mean, there have been in the past a number of people who have used, like shortwave and other frequencies to pick up, unusual voice transmissions, that claim to be from, discarnate entities or what have you.
Right. It amazes me, two things I like to say in response to this is I often wonder, are there any recordings that exist of this communication, any audio recordings? And I know we're in our infancy because Edison, I don't know if he even hadn't created the talking recorder yet, but in the phonograph, I don't even remember the dates that was created. So I often wonder, did Tesla document and record any of these signals? And if he did, if it was possible back then at that time, do they still exist? Are they broken? Were they damaged? Or does someone have them? I'm not trying to create some controversy here if, people go running out to try to find this. But I have to wonder, was he capable at that time of recording any of these communications? I mean, you and I both know we would love to hear it.
As far as I know, there has never been any kind of recordings of, say, like Tesla's voice,
right?
Like giving a speech or anything like that. So, as for some of these experiments, whether or not he was able to, do some kind of analog recording, and at that time, about the only thing that was available was Edison's, wax cylinders,
right?
To record things, and possibly there would have been like the rudimentary wire recorders much later that came about. But at that point, Tesla was broke and destitute and wouldn't have had the ability to make anything of that anyway. So, I mean, yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to have to look into that to see, but, I've never run across, any indication that, anything like that, happened.
Yeah. It's a shame. For myself, of course, I've been involved in ITC research for many years, and, we have pursued, the spirit boxes, ghost boxes, the sweeping radios, the AM and FM channels moving at certain speeds, anywhere from 250 to 300 milliseconds. And we have received responses, of course. We know, those of us that have been doing this for a long time, without a doubt, that we are receiving intelligent responses. Sometimes we're receiving it from incarnate spirits. Sometimes we're receiving it from consciousness. Even sometimes our own thoughts, people in the room are projecting their thoughts and it's being picked up. But then also we are, which we firmly believe, communicating with loved ones. So for me at this stage, I am fascinated by the fact that Tesla was beginning to experience this. And I have to wonder how far Marconi got. Did Marconi start to hear voices as well? There's certain theories out there and suggestions that Edison was curious about what Tesla was hearing and discovering, whether there are aliens or something else, and that Edison started pursuing this form of communication as well, and that he believed that it was possible, if you create the right device, to record this consciousness or the spirit on the other side. The question is the mystery is how far did they get to actually perfecting that? You know?
Right. Well, Marconi, I think, would be probably the more likely of all of them, excluding Tesla, to actually maybe have been successful with something like that. Because Marconi came from money to begin with, which is one of the reasons why he was so successful in usurping Tesla from the radio patent, even though Tesla got the first patent on radio transmission. A couple of years later, it was taken away from Tesla and awarded to Marconi, and that was because, his family was extremely rich, and he had friends in high places. Now, later on, the Marconi company became involved with a number of different activities that we would refer to as fringe science nowadays. The Marconi company, supposedly came up with the ability that they could stop all electrical and kinetic energy in a certain field of area. It actually demonstrated this to Mussolini at one point, where they were able to stop, like all cars, motors, electricity flowing through the wires in about, maybe about a half a mile area. Again, this was something that Tesla had been working on as well. People make these claims, but then you go back and you find that Tesla had been working on something very similar, years before.
Right.
Unfortunately, a lot of the Marconi's company's work has never seen the light of day in the English language, or even for Italian researchers, because a lot of it has been kind of squirreled away by the various Italian governments and now corporations. And so, we're basically just left to speculate on just exactly what they had been working on.
Yeah, it's just crazy with all these things that these great masterminds, these inventors, had dabbled into and have just left the point we don't know much about. Yet they had publicly spoken about these things, and they've been documented in certain journals or interviews in history, so we know they were actually involved with it. But yet it's kind of come to a standstill. And I have to wonder if the government got involved and took some of these things, because 2 years ago, was it 2 or 3 years ago? My God, time flies. I was in Los Angeles. I met with two producers that had started their own production company. One of them was on a hit paranormal show, producer, that's all I'm going to say. And the other one was the head of development at a very large network. And in the meeting, we were discussing a show I was pitching to them called Communicating with the Dead, and involving ITC and these other things. And the producer tells me that during some of their research, when he was involved in this paranormal show, which is still on TV, he stated that they had met with two representatives from the Navy. The Navy brought him into this room, and they had these radios. He turned on the radios, and they started hearing these voices. The voices were responding to them with what they were doing in the room. So they asked, and they told them they were speaking to, basically, consciousness, spirits, that were speaking in lower hertz near the infrared, near the infrasound spectrum, and that they are able to communicate back and forth. Now, he told me they sat down, they asked questions, they were getting responses, and he was so blown away. They said, well, you can't use this for the show, but we thought we would show this to you. He said he was so blown away. He said it was the scariest thing he's ever heard, because they were aware of whatever you were thinking, whatever you were wearing, whatever you were doing. These things were responding to and bringing up in conversation, as well as conversation between themselves that you were listening to. He said, though, that the responses were crystal clear. So we have to wonder that we all know that the governments and what people don't realize is that it's not like the whole United States gets this. There's the Navy, the Army, and whatever else, the Air Force. They all fight for some of these things.
Yes.
To make it part of their program, part of their research, and get the funds necessary that goes to them to continue these forms of technology and research. But as people know, the Navy's been hugely involved with, sound waves in the ocean and listening to mammals and sending signals from one part of the ocean to the next, which requires a completely different frequency, but yet a frequency that they're hoping can't be heard or tapped into from the enemy or from other countries. So when you get involved in that type of research and pushing the envelope, you're going to gain access to unknown regions that have never been gained access to before. So we have to realize that we all know military forces across the planet tend to get technology 20 or 30 years before it even goes public. And some of the things never go public because they use it to their advantage over other countries. So you have to realize that why wouldn't they already be aware of communication going on way below 20 hertz from what we hear with our own ears?
Well, Chris, it makes me wonder if this might not have been part of the truckloads, literally, of material that the U.S. government seized from the Tesla estate after he died in 1943. The very next day, or actually it may have been the very day that he died, the government swooped in and took everything that they could get their hands on. Under the auspices of, what was it? I think it was, they used it was like the Office of Foreign Affairs, since Tesla had not been born in the United States, but he was a naturalized citizen. But actually, it turned out that it was, part of the, of course, the CIA didn't exist then. So, it would have been the FBI and then some of the others. So, they got a hold of everything that they possibly could get their hands on from Tesla estate, papers, inventions, everything. Somebody said that the material in the warehouse that it was first taken to would have filled, what'd they say, like 3 or 4 train cars full.
Wow.
Full of material, and it wasn't just because at that point Tesla was fairly destitute and living in just a small room in the I think it was the New Yorker hotel in Manhattan. But he had his safe there and some other material, but he had material that was scattered all across New York and other places. And, he only had one living relative at the time who was a nephew who was part of the Yugoslavian government. And when his nephew went back to first his apartment, he found that everything had been taken away. It was just everything. And then he went to some of these other locations where material had been stored and, the locks had been broken. Everything was gone. And we know that a lot of this material had then been farmed out to the various branches of military. Naturally, right. The Air Force and at that time it would have been the Army Air Force, right. The Navy and what have you, because the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, got, I know that for a fact, they got some of his stuff, and some of it actually ended up back in, Yugoslavia and put into the Tesla museum there. Then Soviet Union managed to get a hold of stuff as well, because they actually went and developed a particle beam weapon that the United States managed to spot with a satellite at one point. So it wouldn't surprise me that the Navy may have gotten the idea
Sure.
or some of the some of the first writings and research by Tesla, based on his research along those lines, to develop that sort of technology that you talked about. And Chris, that's something, that I need to point out, because a lot of detractors of Tesla, they love to downplay him, because there are numerous websites that attribute Tesla to developing time machines and flying saucers and the teleportation devices. I mean, what have you? And so naturally these detractors, like, oh well, Tesla was just a nut. He didn't develop any of this stuff, and they're right. He didn't develop any of this stuff. He didn't have the ability, to build a flying saucer or a time machine or things like that. But he was the guy who came up with the ideas and the initial research, on a lot of these things. So, yeah, years down the line, once technology caught up, you betcha, it wouldn't surprise me that, some of these wilder claims haven't actually have been developed, not by Tesla, but by people who used his initial research.
Do you think, was he ever involved in the Philadelphia experiment?
And I've written about this. I think that he was approached. You have to realize that the Philadelphia experiment, they started out like around in the late 1930s, and Tesla died in 1943. Yeah. So at that point, he was not in the best of health. And I do think that he had been approached and that he was willing to, work almost like as a consulting, engineer on the project. But the story that I've heard was that he, just kind of like withdrew from the project pretty early on because he felt that what they were wanting to do would actually endanger, anybody who was close by. Right. He didn't feel like, for what I've heard, he didn't feel like that that whoever was working on these experiments had any idea what they were actually doing. Because the initial plan was to try to, degauge ships in such a way that they would be invisible to, mines and torpedoes and things like that. And it wasn't until they actually got into it that they got the idea that, well, hey, maybe these rotating and resonating magnetic currents could also bend light waves and make something appear to be, physically invisible. At that point, Tesla was like, you've got no idea what you're working with. You're going to kill people. I want no more part of it. And then shortly thereafter, he passed away.
Right. And the people that don't know is Tesla really cared about humanity. He wanted to end war. He wanted to see war abolished. And he was hoping that some of his devices and creations would eliminate the need for war, because it would give energy to everybody and it would advance us to such a degree with technology that we would realize that we don't need to fight amongst each other anymore. But unfortunately, he began to see that really that wasn't the interest of those in power, in the military. They wanted to continue to play that chess game. So he started to pull himself away. So the mystery remains, what technology today does the government have that they've gotten from or created based off of, Tesla's specs? People talk about the Star Wars program, that it does exist with satellites where they can blast things out of space with protons. Tesla talked about some of those things to where he could actually send signals, and people talked about death rays, and whether how far he got with that, we don't fully know. But there's that mystery.
I think the one thing that more than likely has been developed, outside of the civilian sector that we really have no idea about yet, is Tesla's idea of the wireless transmission of electricity or energy. Tesla, that was one of Tesla's major dreams, was that you could set up transmitter arrays at various places around the world, and then anybody who had a resonating receiving unit in their house could then light up their home, run all their technology, all without the use of wires. I mean, it would just completely eliminate the grid system. And again, the detractors of Tesla have, they say that, he had no idea what he was doing. He was just going to go and blast the atmosphere, with electricity, and which was just completely wrong. These people have no idea what Tesla had in mind. And unfortunately, hardly anybody else does either, because once again, Tesla did not keep a lot of notes. Anything that he did have has since disappeared. However, I should say, Tesla actually went as far as he was starting to, he actually constructed a wireless transmitter tower in Long Island, and he was all set to fire it up. Tesla would never have gotten that far if he was not positive that this was something that could, that could be done. He would not have gone and solicited the money and had this thing built if he didn't think 100% that it was going to work.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that probably we have that ability now, but it is being, used by, the military or corporations or what have you. I mean, that is a valuable secret that, I think that it's coming out kind of, I think now in, like little spurts, but for the ability to power a home or, like a neighborhood from a transmitter miles away, that's going to be kept, undercover for quite a while, because it's just, it's too valuable of a commodity for the military to let go just yet.
And that's such a shame. Such a shame. Well, everybody listening, you can check out and read Tim's book. It's a very popular book, by the way, called The Lost Journals of Nikola Tesla. And you'll learn more about some of the mysteries and the background involving Tesla and some of his inventions and how they were looked at. But also you can go to Tim's website, conspiracyjournal.com, and learn more about what Tim does and read some of his articles. But he also has webcast programs, The Outer Edge, which is heard on PSN Radio. You can go to the website to listen to it at www.theouteredgeradio.com. And then make sure you check out Exploring the Bizarre, along with Timothy Green Beckley, one of our previous guests, at www.kcorradio.com. Is that correct?
Yes, kcorradio.com.
There you go, kcorradio.com. If listeners would like to be in touch with Tim, if you have any questions, want to know more about some of his books, you can email him at conspiracyjournal@hotmail.com. Any last words, Tim?
Oh, well, I just appreciate you taking the time to have me on, and I encourage everyone to do their own research about Tesla. If you've never heard about the guy, Google his name and just read about what an amazing person Nikola Tesla was, and how much we really owe him and his beautiful brain.
That couldn't be further from the truth. We take things for granted, and electricity and many of the inventions we have today all started with what Tesla had set forth back in the late 1800s, beginning of the century. This is Chris Fleming and Tim Swartz, and you've been listening to this month's edition of Spirit Talk.